joining us today. Thank you all for joining us. Those of you in the room here in DC and those online, welcome. I want to welcome Special Representative Dilawar Syed to the Middle East Institute today. Dilawar is a Special Representative for Commercial and Business Affairs at the United States Department of State. He serves at the State Department's Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs and leads efforts to support the export activities of U.S. companies and helps advance trade and economic policies for America's workers. Previously in government in the Obama administration, he helped the State Department's Global Entrepreneurship Program and in connecting with Silicon Valley innovators with entrepreneurial ecosystems in South Asia, the Middle East, and Turkey. He has also a private sector background, was CEO of the healthcare company Lumiata and the software company Freshworks. Mr. Syed, welcome to MEI. Mr. Syed just returned from a week-long trip to Iraq. He was the senior U.S. government participant in the U.S.-Iraq Business Council delegation to Baghdad. It included more than 70 representatives from nearly 50 U.S. companies. They met with senior officials from the government of Iraq, including the prime minister, cabinet ministers, and private sector CEOs and entrepreneurs. It's notable that this is the first U.S. commercial delegation since 2018, taking place amid growing interest from U.S. companies. Mr. Syed will give some opening remarks to set the scene on the trip and the takeaways from that trip. Then I, along with my colleague, Dr. Randa Saleem, who's on Zoom with us, Dr. Saleem runs our Conflict Resolution and Track 2 Dialogues program, but also has done and does a lot of work in and on Iraq, was there recently, so will join me in a brief conversation with Dr. Syed. And then, of course, we will turn it over to you for your questions and comments, those of you in the room with us, or those of you online. The session, and just to confirm with Mr. Syed, this session is on the record. If I get that correct, so yes, it is. It is also being recorded via the Zoom recording mechanism. So, Mr. Syed, it's great to have you here. Thank you for all the efforts that you do, and we're really eager to hear about this recent trip to Iraq and your main takeaways. So, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Paul, for having me, and thank you everybody for joining here in the room and online as well. Before I dive into Iraq, let me share with you a little bit more about the role and in that context, why this visit matters and how consequential it is. I have the privilege of driving commercial diplomacy globally at the State Department. And when we say commercial diplomacy in the context of State Department, we're talking about how do we deploy U.S. private sector, U.S. entrepreneurs, U.S. innovators, which is, frankly, they're one of our most strategic assets as a force for good. Obviously to drive shared prosperity globally, but also for job growth and prosperity at home. Iraq was my 23rd visit to a partner ally in the last 16 months, and just before the London Ukraine Recovery Conference last week. As you mentioned, Paul, this is a visit that was a due out, if you will, from the Secretary's very good engagement with Foreign Minister Hussein in February of this year, in which the United States and Iraq agreed to broaden our relationship between the two countries as part of a broader strategic framework agreement. And one of the main pillars of that broader conversation is to focus more on economic relationship and to deepen our commercial relationship. And one deliverable being that we will take a delegation of U.S. companies to Iraq in the coming months. So I'm happy to report in a matter of 4 months, thanks to U.S. Chamber of Commerce's amazing work, we took this delegation of 47 companies, as you mentioned, more than 70 representatives to Baghdad, and a few of them also went to Arbil, which is more focused on agriculture. A couple of things to note. As you shared, Paul, earlier, this is the first time we have taken a commercial delegation of this nature to Baghdad in more than 5 years, and obviously since the defeat of ISIS. Number two, this was a very broad sectoral representation of U.S. private sector. In fact, the most represented sector was healthcare. And again, those of you who are familiar with Iraq, this might come as a surprise, but it also speaks to the point that when we are talking about deploying as a force for good, our private sector, we are talking about things that can really help the people of Iraq rebuild healthcare and education. So we had healthcare companies, we had education companies who are helping Iraq with modernizing their education, technology. As you very well know, energy, especially the flare gas, is an issue in case of Iraq. There is a significant flare gas that is harming the environment, also costing valuable foreign exchange to Iraq every year. So we had companies who can help Iraq capture flare gas in the south of the country, both to help the people of Iraq and preserve that gas they can use for their own use versus importing literally the same amount of gas from their neighbor every year, while helping, of course, the climate as well, just given the inordinate impact that the flare gas has on the environment. So again, very broad representation from the private sector. U.S. Chamber was in the lead, and it was wonderful to have also a representation from the United States government, myself, but my colleagues from the Commerce Department as well. As you noted, I come from private sector, and we measure results in terms of how can we close deals, how can we move things forward. And even though this was the first visit, after a very long time, happy to report that we had some real results. Merck signed a cooperation agreement with the Iraqi Ministry of Health on cancer research and cancer treatment in Baghdad. And then there are other deals that I can't speak to yet that are in fairly late stages in the energy sector, in the utility sector, and as well as healthcare. As you noted, we met with the top leadership of Iraq. Met with Prime Minister al-Sudani, Speaker of the Assembly, met with parliamentarians from across the political spectrum. Very energizing to note that almost half of them are female parliamentarians. And it was just very heartening to see the diversity that we saw, both from the ethnic makeup of Iraq, but also the gender. Had obviously very good conversations with the Iraqi business community, some of the top business leaders in the country. And I also spent some time with Iraqi entrepreneurs. As you noted, I am an entrepreneur before I joined the State Department. It was wonderful to visit a shared workspace in Baghdad, where we met with some entrepreneurs that the USAID is supporting. So with that, let me just say a final point. This visit was deliberate. As I mentioned, it came from our conversation the Secretary had with former President Hussein. We believe with the growing stability of the country, with the fact that there wasn't a government for some time, central government now has come in place, and they're making strides. On the day we met the Prime Minister, 3 a.m. that morning, the Iraqi Parliament passed a federal budget for the first time in a long time. And that budget is historic in terms of its scale. It's a 3-year budget and a 3-year commitment to invest in Iraq's rebuilding, $150 billion. So when you look at the stability, growing stability of the country, improved security, commitment from the leadership to business reform, and resources, very importantly, being made available with a broad consensus of a fairly diverse government and a coalition government, that gives us confidence that we can deploy the United States private sector as a force for good in Iraq. So with that, looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Syed. Thank you very much. I'll pitch a couple of questions, then turn to my colleague, Dr. Saleem. Your job and the way our job is to keep contacts with governments in the region and countries in the region, even when they go through their ups and downs. Here you took a delegation of American businesswomen, businessmen. What was their impression? What were their impressions about, I guess, the general situation, the governance situation, and what were their impressions about the actual feasibility of them doing business? What worried them? What encouraged them from their perspective? Just arriving in Baghdad?
Absolutely. So I'm going to try to do justice to their impression, but because also it's my impression. But Paul, overall, again, as I mentioned, I think as you go to Iraq and just visibly the city feels like it's on the move and it's in a rebuild phase, just optically. Right next to the United States Embassy, where I was staying, you have a modern building being constructed, which will be home for the Iraqi central bank. And it's incredible architecture. So you see the rebuild happening in the country. There is energy on the streets, and but more importantly, when we sat down with the top leadership, we had a very candid dialogue with the Prime Minister. He was very intentional about business reform, and we shared our concerns. We also shared our hopes and aspirations. So I think the delegation felt that this was the right moment. And not just the Prime Minister, but also members of his coalition government who represent different parts of the society and regions of Iraq as well. The impression was that there is absolute seriousness on part of the Iraqi government to attract foreign investment, and in particular to attract US investment. I heard this repeatedly in conversations that folks were welcoming of the US private sector. In fact, they said, look, we would rather do business with you. And by the way, this is something I've heard in literally almost all of my visits over the past year and a half. If given a choice, foreign governments will go work with us because we help raise standards when we are spending our energies investing in the country. So the impression was positive. Obviously, these deals take time. It's going to take some time to go back in for these companies to get to know again the country, to move these deals forward. But we felt intent. We felt there was a strong feeling of, hey, we're going to have access. We're going to try to streamline things for you. We're going to cut some red tape. We also gave feedback on things that were of concern to folks. For example, Iraq is still very much a cash-run economy. Making sure there's a developed financial system, a banking system, so companies can do business, we can repatriate profits. All that was very well received by both the officials, but also people in the private sector.
Second question, as you said, you visit a lot of these countries around the world and around the region. Business persons can invest anywhere in the world, so you need to have a comparative advantage. And when you look at the potential disadvantages or challenges in Iraq's still listed as one of fairly high corruption levels, fairly high levels of political instability. It took a long time to form a government and so on. Security is not, always assured. So when you're with this delegation, comparing it with other places they could invest, is corruption the biggest issue, weak judiciary, political uncertainty? Where do you gauge those challenges? No doubt Iraq is full of opportunity. It's a very rich country, both in terms of human resources and natural resources, and can grow tremendously, but it has these obstacles. How do you see those obstacles, and how fast are they improving?
So, as you noted, business environment is a top challenge we face actually in a lot of places, including some of our most closest economic partners. Iraq clearly has its share of challenges. And we talked about corruption, very openly. That we have to, you have to eliminate that, and our companies, will operate in the way with the rules of the road, in a sandbox that is clean, and that is an expectation that we have set. Again, the commitment that we receive from the top leadership, and the fact that they give time to us, and by the way, this visit has been in preparation for some time by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So there's a lot of groundwork done, right, and set the expectations as to what we need for us to be able to have a productive outcome for this visit. So we felt there's been a strong commitment to improve the business environment, to improve operating processes by companies can go and deploy. To your point about worker and talent, as you all know, Iraq is a relatively large country, 42 million people, very young. One of the things that I shared with the Prime Minister was the importance of developing the talent when it comes to a digitally skilled workforce. We're very curious about how many, for example, computer science graduates are coming out of the country, how many data scientists are being produced by the country, how many petroleum engineers by the country, because you have some time you had a decade where,
Mhm.
a generation lost the opportunity to get education. And that's why we included higher ed as part of our focus to make sure that as our companies go and invest and want to scale, there is a local workforce that they can rely on. Because unlike the Gulf nation, there is no immigration from South Asia or Southeast Asia.
Right.
These are the
It's their
Iraqis.
own
And in fact,
people.
to your
Yeah.
point, one of the attraction of Iraq is it has its own population and workforce to draw upon. But are they at the right level of skill? So absolutely, those are some of the areas that we are focused on. We are giving feedback and tracking. But to your point, we're encouraged by the potential. When you look at $150 billion worth of federal budget being passed for the next 3 years into law by a very diverse Iraqi coalition government, that's no mean feat in the Republic of Iraq. And there is very significant outlays, specific outlays for CapEx, for infrastructure, for renewable energy, for healthcare, for education, technology. That encourages us, right? And then, of course, in the Kurdistan region, where we've had better engagement, right? We see similar energy there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We turn to my colleague, Dr. Saleem. Renda, over to you.
Thank you, Paul, and good to meet you, albeit virtually, Special Representative Syed. I was also in Baghdad last month, and I don't think we crossed paths while we're there. I have two questions, and both are energy and climate, related, because these are big issues for Iraq. So we see the countries in the Gulf really working hard on economic diversification, starting to, move their economies away from total reliance on hydrocarbons. And as we well know, about 96% of Iraq's resources come from the sale of oils. And so did you engage with the leadership, especially the prime minister, his advisors, the private sector on economic diversification issues, solar, wind, so I would be interested. And then what were their reactions?
That's an excellent question. And the short answer is I did, but let me expand upon what I observed. And many of you probably follow the country, so perhaps you will see, you will appreciate what I heard. It's interesting. My impression is that the government very much feels that they haven't yet fully developed the conventional fossil fuel hydrocarbon economy. They were talking about inviting interest for a modern refinery in the country because they believe that because of conflict, war, for so many years, they have not developed the core hydrocarbon. So I definitely felt there was more natural focus there versus, as you rightfully say, when you go to UAE and you go to Qatar and we work with those partners very closely, there is a commitment at the state level to diversify the energy economy. So I think in Iraq, I felt like it's early. I talked about solar. I said, look, you have plenty of sunshine here and you have blackouts. And we were seeing how can we contribute towards that. And so there was a reception to that, but it wasn't clear to me that they have thought through the path forward on renewable energy. That's why the flare gas deals are so important, because like my view is we have to be practical. Let's meet where people are ready to meet. We know that this flare gas is a major contributor to warming in the region, in the world perhaps. It is affecting the people of Iraq. It's affecting the children of Basra. Many of you already saw the BBC documentary. It's absolutely heart-wrenching. And I brought that issue up even with the Iraqi diplomats here a few months ago. And they're open to US companies, a couple of them from Houston, seeing that they can capture the flare gas, which will give them a resource for their gas versus importing it from their neighbor. So that's a climate action that I can tell you with some confidence. I think the Iraqi government is prepared to move forward. We will certainly absolutely continue to push the concept of solar. As you know, that's a priority for the administration. It's something that we feel very strongly. But I think the first step, I think it's fair to say that didn't seem to be a big area of focus yet for the.
Quick follow-up on the gas flaring issue. Why is it going to be different this time? I mean, we have been in discussions. I mean, the American government has been, previous administration have been in discussions with the Iraqis about the gas flaring issues for a long time, and we know part of this issue is political, having to do with Iran. Why do you think this time they will act? They will be different? I mean, is it the kind of government that is in place, or is it a realization on the part of the Iraqis that it's really, a win-win for them to work on this issue?
So the way I look at this is, and this could be said about the broader initiative, why is this time different? In diplomacy, we have to believe in the art of possible. And that's what we do every single day in many, many places, many parts of the world. This visit for me was a highly consequential one for Iraq, for the US-Iraq relationship, and for the region. And even if we get a fraction of the deliverables out of it, it's going to move things forward. We need to be able to make a couple of deals happen that will show confidence that there is the possibility of execution, right? And so we can go tackle it. You're absolutely correct. If you look at the past, it may not give us a lot of confidence, but we also know there was a lot of conflict that happened. On the flip side, and something that I appreciated and I found it almost moving, I was absolutely moved by the resilience of the people of Iraq. Look at what this country has gone through. For almost 15, 20, more longer, since the 80s, since the war with Iran. And I mean, the second biggest city was occupied by ISIS not too long ago. And here they are passing a federal budget with representation from across the country and feeling that intent and saying, we welcome you to come and invest. We want to work with you, help us improve our business environment. So I would take that on face value and engage. But I hear you completely. We have to be very watchful. What gives me also a lot of confidence here is that we have US Chamber of Commerce very, very involved. This was the delegation that they designed, they recruited. Steve Lutz is a great friend. He is extremely intimately familiar with the country, has built good relationships with the top leadership across the political aisle in Iraq. And they will help ensure that we actually execute on these things. I also found that the US companies who were there, they were very intentional about getting business done. See, at the end of the day, in our system, it's the companies that close deals. We can only help facilitate and bring up these issues that we're talking about here, as a stakeholder community. So I feel confident. I think again, the reform mindedness, the intent that is there, the actual capex that's been put aside by the federal government, and just overall, the sense that I got that they don't have a choice. They have to build forward. They've gone through a lot. There is just so much to be built, and so we were pretty candid about this. That let's leverage this opportunity. It takes a lot of effort to bring a delegation like this. We want to drive results. So I'm hopeful, but clearly we're going to have to do work on both sides.
One more question before I turn it over again to Paul, if I may, and that has to do with water. So I was in Iraq last month, and I think everybody is talking about the water shortages, and I'm pretty sure you heard the same thing. And you mentioned Basra. Basra is severely affected. Not only is it about the access to water, but also the implication for sanitation, for health. You mentioned health. So it is a whole set of issues. And I mean, according to the Ministry of Water Resources, Iraq today is suffering from the worst water shortage in a century. So part of the problem, of course, is the amount of water that's coming into Iraq from neighboring countries, and that has to do with their damming. Building all these dams that are restricting the flow of the water into Iraq, but also the quality of the water by the time it gets to Iraq gets very bad. But setting that aside, a big part of the problem with water shortages is water resource management inside Iraq. And I wonder, and maybe it's a question that's trying to create some interest on your part, if in the future we really, I mean, the US has lots of expertise in water resource management, and I think Iraq will need expertise and skills and knowledge in water resource management, even bringing the digital and technological innovation in this country. Did that come up? Is this something that you were thinking about going forward?
I think that's obviously a big topic, as you rightfully pointed out. This is the cradle of civilization in part because of Euphrates and Tigris, and they are dried up, and it's heart-wrenching to see just when you're landing what the state of these rivers are in Iraq. In general, what I felt, and I think you're spot on, is that there will need to be some significant investment in capacity building in Iraq. I think we're going to need to make sure that we have partners on the other side who we can help, train, share best practices, whether it's water management or energy management for that matter, or even thinking about carbon impact. It's not clear to me how deep that capacity is, if you will. There's definitely seems to be, the parliamentarians that I met, and I met with members of almost half a dozen committees in parliament, very well structured, very similar to our congressional makeup, and it was very heartening to see, they're very organized.
I hope they're more productive than our. No comment, you don't have to comment on that.
But I'm not sure whether on the public official side, what level of like civic, if you will, capacity there is. And I think water would be one of those things. And again, this is something we do every single day. Like a State Department, as you may be aware, we invest in capacity building across the world. And so what we are hopeful is, again, Rana, that from this visit, we will generate enough confidence for both sides to say, let's go and take the next step. Again, because the secretary has broadened this engagement in the form of strategic framework agreement with Iraq, some of these topics can come up. And I would actually welcome your input as well as to what are other things that we should be adding, and something we're happy to share with our colleagues in the NEA Bureau.
Thank you. Thank you, Randa, for your questions. Let me shoot you an additional question, but let me ask everybody here in the room, if they have a comment or question, put it in the vertical position, put your tent card. If you're online, use the raise hand function online. I can see you on the screen. So in preparation to turning it over to the floor, you're with the State Department, hence part of the foreign policy arm of the United States government. Two questions. What are sort of US State Department goals economically in Iraq, if anything, other than we want US businesses to go and so on? Are there any particular sectors that the State Department wants particular engagement with? Are there any specific goals from the State Department economically in Iraq? The more broader question is about America's friends and adversaries. In other words, our friends in the region, the Gulf countries, Saudis obviously are also increasingly active in Iraq. I think Israelis have some activity in the Kurdish area. How do you encourage, how do you view America's political friends investing, taking delegations like you have into Iran? And then, of course, into Iraq, of course, then there's Iran and Iran's presence, and there's China and China's presence, which the State Department regards in a more adversarial tone. So you are the economic sort of side of the State Department. How do you view the State Department's view economically there, and how do you view the State Department's view about its allies and adversaries engaging economically in Iraq?
So Paul, let me say, when we engage on economic and commercial issues and topics and opportunities, they're all with the geostrategic lens.
Mm-hmm.
My colleagues in the Commerce Department, for example, will do more transactional stuff. Right?
Mm-hmm.
For us, it is geostrategic. We know that, that's why first I try to explain what we do with commercial diplomacy. And I mentioned we want to make sure that US companies can compete effectively. And it is more competitive now than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago in almost every virtual place where we are. So there is a deliberate reason, there's a strategic reason why we took this delegation and we accompanied US Chamber of Commerce there, because we believe that for the broader stability of the Middle East, for the stability of Iraq itself, which has gone through a lot of suffering. It's a large country, large added population, very young country, 35% unemployment. 35% unemployment of a resource-rich nation. It is in our national security interest to help ensure Iraq progresses. So that is geostrategic. It's not disconnected from strategic imperatives. But of course, when we look at just the economic realm, there are areas of focus that are important for the administration, and climate action being one. That's why I appreciate the question that Ananda asked about renewable energy. Iraq is a major producer of hydrocarbons, right? So how do we get them to be broader in their thinking about energy economy, right? Even while we appreciate that they've had to do some development that had to be stunted, for some time because of wars. So that is strategic. That's what we're focused on. Capturing flare gas as an example. Healthcare. We came out of a pandemic, right? We know it is a priority globally, and we want to help ensure better health of people at large. And again, Iraq's healthcare system has been pretty much destroyed. And how do we help rebuild? So that's it. I would say that it is geostrategic. It's also important to note that if we don't show up, who will show up. And this is a place which is still early in its rebuilding phase. So now is the moment when we see there is a reform mindedness, there is resource being made available, and our companies need to show up and do business so that we can help lead versus having to react to our adversaries, making grounds.
Well, if I could dig a little bit deeper, what's your knowledge, information of the presence of those other places? I mean, they will show up. They have showed up. The Iranians are there. The Chinese are there. The Saudis and the Gulfis are there. It's good that the Americans are there. Do you have like a sketch of where you think Iranian companies already are present, have an advantage? China certainly buys a big part of the oil and so on. How do you see that, in a sense, geostrategic map inside Iraq economically, if you have a sense of it?
It's obviously when you go and you see the influence of its neighbors, including Turkey, by the way.
Turkey, I should have
which is a
mentioned.
major.
Yes.
My question is, Paul, there's not much to show for that.
Not
That's
much.
the reality.
Yeah.
And that's my first impression. Look at how much that has to happen here. So what have all of them contributed to that? And that's precisely why we found a lot of energy and genuine energy, if I may say, warmth on part of the Iraqi stakeholders, private sector, entrepreneurs, people at large that I met, and I always do that as well as the top leadership. To say, we want you. And in fact, why aren't you coming soon enough? And obviously we need to continue this pace. Our ambassador is very focused on it. She's energetic about this, and obviously was a major partner, and she's on the ground and the chief of staff to make it happen. So I obviously Iraq has its neighborhood, but frankly, those actors don't have much to show for in terms of their contribution to move that country forward. And we felt there was appetite for that. And again, we believe it's the right environment at this point.
Thank you very much. In the room, we have Mimi Burke, Mr. Fleming, and then Runda back on the screen. Mimi, floor is yours. Introduce yourself.
Thank you, Paul. Mimi Burke from Brownstein. Thank you, Mr. Syed, for sharing your trip with us today. We just spoke about some of the countries that are returning to Iraq for regrowth and building, but maybe you can tell us, are the Iraqis returning to Iraq to rebuild their own country? Because that would show a great enthusiasm for the future and bringing their new talent they learned abroad and their capital and their enthusiasm for their own country.
That's a great question, Amy, and I think diaspora always play a role. In fact, they're often the first movers, right? Whenever we go for rebuilding. Before I visited Iraq, I went to Dearborn, Michigan. As you know very well, in Michigan, we have one of the largest Iraqi American population. And the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has also worked with the U.S. Iraqi Congress, if I'm saying the name correctly, which is the diaspora group of business leaders based out of Michigan. And there seems to be interest and engagement in the group. In fact, one of the gentlemen that I really enjoyed meeting in Iraq is a former Santa Clara University professor. I'm from the Bay Area, so it's interesting to reconnect with him there. And he's advising the Prime Minister on technology from Silicon Valley. That's his roots are. So I found these seriously talented. I mean, Iraq has a very sophisticated diaspora that these folks are engaged. They're being given access, very importantly, this is hardly to note, to govern at the highest level, and they feel like they can influence the country's policy and direction at this point. Now, obviously, we want to see that happen. This is, again, the signs that I saw in my visit over 4 days. But we are picking on the fact that the diaspora is engaging. I like the fact that Chamber of Commerce is also engaging with the ethnic business community groups to help ensure that they can be a part of this. Some of them can also invest in the country. Both their money, but also the talent. I go back to it. Frankly, Iraq is not necessarily a resource. Cash is not necessarily a problem here. The issue, in my opinion, is capacity of the country, the business environment of the country, the talent that we can deploy, who can help us scale these companies when people are ready to invest.
Thank you. Mr. Fleming, the mics are on. I should have warned you earlier, but they're always on. Go ahead. Cut mics.
Always a good assumption. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Fleming. I work for Acuity International. Acuity owns Sallyport and Janus, both of which operate in Iraq at present. But my question is related to an issue that cropped up about 6 months ago or so, which was the substantial hard currency issue around the dollar reserves. The Iraqis were limited by the U.S. government to something like utilizing 25% of their dollar reserves on a daily basis. I may be getting that a little bit wrong, but my point is only it was related to the lack of transparency in the banking sector, particularly around the end user, the end recipient of a bank transfer. So when I was there, I was there at Baghdad and Erbil 6 months ago. For a period of time, no credit cards at all were being honored. People were smuggling suitcases full of dollars out of Baghdad and up into, there were checkpoints to look for cash, cash money moving around. And it made an appearance in the press here. And then there was a meteoric disappearance of the issue. And I'm just wondering, really, from a business perspective, did the U.S. government succeed in its attempt to bring the Iraqi banking sector into line, or is this the kind of issue that we're going to be facing as a business community, where there'll be these kind of unreliable local banks and lurching from one crisis to another in the hard currency sector? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And John, you're absolutely correct in terms of it's a cash on the economy, stunningly for its size, right, and complexity. And that is one of the main topic of discussions. I also met with the deputy governor of the Iraqi Central Bank, and we said, what's your plan? How are you going to regularize while ensuring there are controls in place for abuse? So we are not there yet in terms of getting them to that place where you want it to be. This is the first step. Again, recognizing what that country has experienced in recent decades. That's something we're going to have to work with them and make sure that they develop a financial system that is modern, that is they can operate and go this with the world. Today, it's not there yet. My personal experience also was you could not use a credit card.
Yeah.
You just have to pay and carry hard currency. And there are implications of that,
Yeah.
negative from this point, right? Especially given the region in which the country is. So that is a big area that we have to focus on.
Thank you, Mr. Syed. Renda on the screen.
I'm willing to wait if there are other people in the audience who want to ask questions.
Suddenly there are two who jumped on this. Three. Marvin, let me go to you first.
Yeah,
Unless Renda, you're okay to wait?
I'm waiting. Yes. That's
Okay,
fine.
Marvin.
yes, I was curious about the delegation itself. What kind of investor is looking at the Iraqi opportunities? And at the other end, among the officials what kind of investment are they looking for. Because in the countries that I'm interested in, one of the big issues is the investment going to create jobs? And you mentioned the very high unemployment. This becomes critical. Otherwise, it's the elite helping the elite, and in terms of the popularity ultimately of investment.
Yeah. It's a very important point. We want to avoid elite capture, but I don't know whether we can avoid elite capture with just one visit. Frankly, our commercial relationship is at a very elemental stage. So the first visit after 5-6 years, the country was not even together. This is literally, we are in the first innings of a long game of rebuilding. Well, I think we have to be very realistic about what are the expectations, the outcomes that should give us some satisfaction, which is getting 2 or 3 deals done in a transparent manner, like to speaking about the financial situation in the country, the banking, which gives the broader business community confidence to say we want to go in there. What I'm heartened by is that the representative we had, where a lot of them were from the region. So companies, the US companies that have regional headquarters in Dubai, in the region, they already have footprint in the country. Many of them have worked with Iraq before, and there actually were some Iraqi Americans or Iraqis descent folks who were part of the delegation as well. So there was a familiarity, if you will, with the country and with the power structure, if you will, and the stakeholders, relationships that are very, very important. Language, many people spoke Arabic. So that gives me confidence that, this is a fertile ground to be able to get some business done. I wish I could tell you there'll be 2 or 3 deals that will create lots and lots of jobs. May not happen necessarily from this first set of companies, but this was an exposure to a pretty broad sector of US economic stakeholders who see, oh, this country is open for business and could be an opportunity for me to invest, given that I want to maximize shareholder value. I think that was there. But when you look at a deal like, for example, healthcare, it was awesome to see that's where the focus was. I mean, we're looking at the 2 or 3 hospitals where US companies are building modern hospitals in Baghdad. Like that's societal challenge. I mean, at a very basic level, a country that has literally no healthcare system left, right? And they were asking for hospitals we built in Karbala and Najaf, which attract a lot of pilgrims. So again, it's heartening to see that focus wasn't just on energy, right? There was broader. Baghdad University, it's a business school that's being built with the advice of the Iraqi American Diaspora Group. I thought it was phenomenal. I would love to go back and lecture on entrepreneurship there one day. So, those were positives, but I think it will take some time before we have a job creating major manufacturing, deals being signed in the country. Also I have questions about the skill of the workers, right? Where are these folks in terms of the skills and how employable they are?
Thank you. I have Mr.
Thank you.
Mr. Mutlu, Mr. Farley, and Mr. Halverson. Then I'll go over to you, Renda, on the screen.
Hello, everybody. I'm Mutlu from Sierra Nevada Corporation, U.S. Defense Aviation and Space Company. My question is, Mr. Syed, you mentioned about $150 billion budget for the next 3 years, but we also know that they have a big ambition to create jobs and welfare to their people. And in that respect, they should be more careful how to spend that money. And when we compare with China or Chinese or Iranian companies, as US company, we're not that much competitive. I'm just talking price-wise part of it. And also lacking the transparency and all that corruption actually works for them, not for us. So what is our biggest strength that we can promote to the Iraqi authorities to choose us rather than they choose the other companies?
So I can tell you the biggest strength that we have, and there are many. One is that we have better project services. And we actually have proven results with those. Look, I mean, PRC, China has invested, quote unquote, invested or helped from the commercial side in many parts of the world, you can see what the results are. These large projects that are financed by Chinese-owned banks have often gone nowhere and actually have caused major financial distress in a large part of the world, in Africa and South Asia, countries that have been literally on the brink of default, in many cases actually defaults. And I think Iraqis are well aware of that. I mean, they've gone through a lot as a nation. And so we are never going to be able to compete on price, which is the model of our competitors, but we're going to compete on actual delivery, quality of products and services, and relationships. And going back to the relationship point, again, I'm very happy the Chamber of Commerce is leading the way here. We are Iraqis who are part of the process. They understand that, the US brand, when it comes to quality and delivery, no one comes close to it. And I think Iraqis are discerning enough to understand that is the case. Given how long it took for this government to even be formed and how much effort they have to go through to even come up with a budget that is acceptable to a very diverse coalition government, and they did it for 3 years, they, I believe, feel some performance pressure to deliver it to their people. It is a democracy, right? While an emerging democracy. So again, we felt that there was the intent, and the Prime Minister is, he was very detail oriented on some of these things. By the way, to your earlier point, obviously, this budget is for the people of Iraq. We are just here to help. And we respect, Iraqis obviously making their own choices. We're just offering that, look, we have solutions to help you, whether it's the renewable side, whether it's on the agriculture side, in education and healthcare. And we just felt there was an openness to that. Finally, let me say this about competition. Everywhere we go in the world and commercially, we compete. Iraq is no different. And my message to CEOs, and I've been one, so I can say it very bluntly, we have to show up, and we're no longer the only game in town. We should be prepared to show up, hit the pavement, build relationships, hustle to win those deals. And I'm confident that we will. But again, it was the first step. I'm certainly hoping that a few of these things happen, a few of the deals can be closed in the coming years.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Farley? Mic is on.
Mic is on. Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you for the presentation. I have two. Yeah.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the reminder.
Yes, sir.
Alex Farley, Wilson Center Program Associate for the Middle East Program. I have two interrelated questions. And the first is speaking from the standpoint of an American firm and kind of the character of the firms that were in your delegation. And I apologize, I missed the beginning of the conversation, so I may have missed that part. What would be your biggest concern in terms of the maturity of the Iraqi firms and then the Iraqi business ecosystem in general in making sure that those investments are worthwhile and timely and good price wise? And then something I'm more personally familiar with is that the status of Iraqi startups is getting a lot more attention. And speaking as an entrepreneur, I noticed on your resume on the back, what is the appetite for maybe some of the more emerging market friendly VC firms in the United States to actually participate more in Iraq? Or are there barriers, especially the cash economy, lack of digitalized finance is a barrier there? What would be a way of convincing them that this is an emerging market that they should be participating in?
Let me take that question first, because that is closer to my own passions as well, and then I'll come to the first one. When I was traveling there, it took me a while to travel to Baghdad. Just the logistics were a little bit challenging as an official. I was thinking about, like, if I'm a VC, what would appeal to me about investing in Iraq? And one of the theses that I could come up with was, it's a large country, 42 million population, and a young country, and Arabic being the common language that is spoken in that region. And if we could have Iraqis be part of teams, they could work with the Egyptians and others. Here we have a fairly sizable market to go and build local products for, and we haven't seen those happen yet. Countries where we have more resource are generally smaller countries in the Gulf. So it is we are sort of under tapped for that opportunity. But in order for that to take place, we need a very sizable tech talent. And I personally am not convinced they're not there yet. One of the questions when I go around in countries, I ask the question often of government is, literally give me stats. Can you tell me how many graduates are with computer science degrees? And I couldn't get a straight answer yet. But the fact that I asked the question and people heard me and they were taking notes and we have some emails back and forth on trying to gather data, that's a good sign. And that's what big, if there's one takeaway this conference is the first step. They even haven't had these conversations with anyone in years. Imagine this country defeated ISIS. Now, speaking of entrepreneurship, some of the most moving stories from this visit was at this place called The Station, which is a shared workspace. There were majority female entrepreneurs, small business owners that USA is assisting with. I met one of the women, she was making these garments, and I just was curious how she got into the business. And she said, I lost my husband and I'm so sorry. She said, yeah, he was taken away by ISIS. I don't know what happened. No, we read about this stuff in press, we see it on TV, but to actually meet somebody, look them in the eye, and this happened to a lot of people, and I felt moved, and this woman was strong and resolute. That is what I found inspiring about these people. They are ready to move forward. She has now got 6 small shops, has 15, 20 employees, majority female, and I saw that in many places. So again, on the high growth VC side, we have some work to do, but the entrepreneurial energy is there. I mean, that's human DNA. That gave me a lot of hope that nobody's waiting. People are doing what they can, given what they just went through as a country, to go and create value and create economic value. On your first question, if I've got that right, you were questioning about what is the local firm capacity as the US companies. I think in some sectors, Iraq is more advanced than others, just because it's been a hydrocarbon economy. So for most part, so I felt that some of the business leaders that I met, they clearly had the scale, and these were sophisticated leaders. In other areas, yes, we have banking as an example. I think there's some serious work to be done. Technology, yes, it's early, a lot of work to be done. I would like to see more resellers of US tech companies in the country. We didn't see many of them. So it seems quite, again, skewed towards the conventional fossil fuel industry, petroleum, not as diversified. But again, I think therein lies the opportunity because the country does have a resource. We obviously develop it, both people-wise and infrastructure-wise.
Thank you. Mr. Helverson.
Hi there, Thomas Helverson here from MEI. We've heard you talk about how this delegation trip to Iraq is a great first step, right? And a step in a long process for a country that's come a long way. But I'm really curious to hear from you, out of all the many things that need to go on to strengthen economic partnerships between the US and Iraq, what are the concrete short-term and medium steps that you and your colleagues at the Office of Commercial and Business Affairs at State are looking at to actually achieve? What are the actual achievable deliverables in the short and medium term that you think are achievable and will help to move this long process forward in the next year, 2 years?
So on the short term front, what I would say is we will look at a few deals, commercial deals that are percolating as I speak, and I couldn't speak to them yet because they're not done yet.
Right.
And help ensure that they happen. We have a commercial section at the embassy. Our ambassador is very focused on business outcomes, and there's a very senior, economic unit head in Baghdad as well. My team and our team here at the State Department, as well as colleagues in other agencies, will work with them to help ensure that these opportunities do come to fruition. If that happens, again, it gives you a template. It says, look, here are 2 or 3 opportunities that got closed, and hopefully those headlines will be helpful for others to follow. In the medium term, I would say it's very important for us to help Iraq build its capacity. We pick a couple of areas where we can help ensure. You brought up a great point about water management, right? It's a chronic issue in the country. I mean, that's that's basic infrastructure level of engagement. But we could do some engagement with the help of our colleague of state and USAID to invest in technical training of Iraqi bureaucrats in various agencies. I mean, they do have a pretty good structure, a federal structure, we have obviously have to create that. And so there is an opportunity there. So those are the two things I would call out: capacity building, but in the short term, a couple of deals. And three, and I'm so glad, John, you brought this up, we have to keep bringing up the point of this environment, financial sector. Like you have to be able to move the money, period. I mean, it's as simple as that. And I think they get it too. But they're also overwhelmed by the task of that. So we're going to have to provide support, whether it's the Treasury and others. This is why when the Secretary had this conversation with Farmer Susan, it was about having a broader strategic framework, which includes other agencies in the US government as well, because obviously we don't need everybody's help to help Iraq develop some of these capacities, infrastructure. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's helpful.
Thank
And
you.
is there another trip to Iraq in the cards in the coming years?
I'm sure there will be, but what's more important? These companies go back
Yes.
and they spend time. Right? They're the ones who do the business, and we certainly hope that will be happening.
Yeah.
Well, the final question will be from my colleague Renda. Dr. Saleem, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Quick question, and it's about about the Al Muhandis company. I mean, as you know, Al Muhandis company was established and it's it's a construction firm that's very much modeled along a similar construction firm that is basically operated and owned by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards in Iran. So Al Muhandis firm is a construction firm. Now, there is a major concern among people in Iraq, people I talked with last month, that a lot of the money in the budget, and you are correct, this is a historical budget, 153 billion, 3 years, that a lot of the money in the infrastructure in that budget is going to be allocated to the Muhandis firm. And Muhandis firm, part of the owners are on the US sanctions list. Was there a message conveyed by during your trip to the senior Iraqi officials about the consequences of this happening, of that kind of scenario, in terms of creating a challenging political environment for American businesses to invest in Iraq?
The focus of our visit was to make sure that US companies show up and help rebuild it at this moment. I mean, we are very, very early stages of this. And we have to be present, right? Otherwise our adversaries will be a lot more active compared even where they are today. And so really, that's really where the focus is. And Chamber of Commerce developed this delegation for some months. So that's really where the trip originated. Our hope is that, again, if we can execute on some opportunities near term, back to your good question there, and show results, it will encourage more companies to go abroad. And over time, we can push back the role that our adversaries play in Iraq. As we wrap up, what I found most encouraging was just how welcoming Iraqi government was for the US to play a bigger role, a much, much bigger role in the commercial front than where we are today. And I think that's a very good start. And clearly there's a roadmap to get there on business environment issues, on capacity issue, on education, healthcare, infrastructure, water management. And there's a lot that we can do here that we do all the time with the allies and partners that we will invest in. And I'm also very happy that we have Chamber of Commerce, who's involved as a partner. We have Iraqi diaspora, who is keen to help. And we certainly hope we can deploy everyone to help move the country forward and also create opportunities for our companies here in the United States.
Well, thank you, Mr. Syed, for joining us today, and thank you to the audience in the room and online. Thank you for leading that delegation. Obviously, for the US to be leading diplomacy first and economics first rather than military is a very positive sign and very good for the people of the region who need jobs, who need to move forward. And economic development is critical to them as well as to the relationship. So Thank you for what you're doing, and thanks for joining us here.
Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Mr. Syed. Thank you, sir. Have a nice